This episode is sponsored today by the book 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. This book was written by kids. It's for kids. It's a coloring book. When you have a tragedy of divorce and you have young children who do not know how to express themselves, this coloring book, 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce, is the coloring book for them. Pick it up today at blendingthefamily.com or even on Amazon. 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. Again, written by kids, for kids.
Welcome to Blending the Family, the podcast. Topics can range from dads hitting rock bottom, daughters watching their parents divorce, or even what is a good wine for couples to have while talking about finances. Here's your host, who was once voted most likely to be put into a locker, Tommy Maloney.
Thank you for tuning in to the podcast known as Blending the Family, the podcast. And that was horrible, but I'm going to keep going because it's getting past my bedtime. I am your host, Tommy Maloney. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, caring, sharing. And you are, I'm not just saying this, but you are the best audience ever. Ever. You are. Give yourself a pat on the back. Here, I'll make the sound for you. That's you getting a pat on the back by you. All right, on this episode, we have Michael Laidler. Oh my gosh, I had a blast with Michael. The story about Michael was he reached out to me through LinkedIn, and you can find me on LinkedIn, the Tommy Maloney. And he said, I think I'd be a good guest. And you know what? You are not going to be disappointed. Michael was a great guest. Michael, very passionate international leadership coach. He's a certified trainer, keynote speaker. He's a John Maxwell team trainer. I mean, when I think of the world of coaching, I'm now going to think of Michael. Okay? In the show notes, you will see where you can find him. He is on the Instagram, excuse me. Whoa. Wow. At Michael Laidler. That's Michael, and then his last name is spelled Laidler, Laidler. You'll find him on the website, michaellaidler.com, LinkedIn, everything with his name. Facebook. There you go. All right. What did we talk about? We talked about he was actually raised by his mom and grandmother, and I could relate to that because I was raised primarily by my mom, but I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I'm going to grab a quick thing of water. Yep, water. And speaking of no wine, we also talk about why you need the 12 disciples in your world, I call it your posse. I said it. I'm not ashamed to say the word posse. What else? What else did we talk about? It was just a fun interview. He, talking about being raised by his mom, and it turns out a lot of his coaching clients are also women, which is always fine. I always find that fascinating. Just because, and we'll talk about that. All right. Gosh, I really don't know what else to say except my wife Ann just made a fabulous dinner. Hold on, more water. Man, it's really raining. It's raining here. Fabulous dinner, and I want to shout out to her. She made tilapia. I don't know if you can hear Duke in the background. He didn't get any tilapia. I gave him some rice. We had some wild rice and asparagus. Oh my gosh, it was so good. So good. I'm sorry if you're thinking food right now. Oh my gosh. I mean, it was just tilapia from the grocery store, and oh my gosh, it was so good. So good. What else? Oh, I took a leap of faith. I'm taking a leap of faith and going to be needing your help. I put my notice in at the day job and following my passion of having this podcast, doing more coaching again, speaking of coaching, and more speaking. So get ready, world. Tommy Maloney is taking a leap of faith. Ooh, yeah. All right. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. You are, once again, a great audience. And if you really, really, and I've noticed you really have, enjoyed this podcast, please, it helps to have reviews and ratings on however you get this podcast, be it on iTunes, be it on Stitcher Radio, be it on Spotify. Please, please, I'm begging. This is free. This is costing me money, but it's free for you because I love you. You're one of my best friends. Trust me. Once again, Michael Laidler, passionate international leadership coach, is on the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as Michael and I did. We had a blast. It was a lot of fun. All right. I think that's it. You have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. I am going to finish editing this podcast. Bye-bye. First question.
Okay.
First question is, so what is your law enforcement background?
So I have a little over 13 years now. I actually started as a street cop in Tallahassee, Florida, and I did that from about 2005 to 2009, where I became a field training officer. In other words, I was training newer officers to become the beat officers. And then at the end of that, in 2009, I actually became a Border Patrol agent in Laredo, Texas. There, I became a K9 handler. And, I mean, you don't really lead people as much, but you do lead a dog.
Yeah. What was your... do you still have the dog?
No, he was so young. When I trained him, I was his first trainer, but he was only 2. So when I left, he was only 4. And Border Patrol, they don't let you retire the dogs until no less than 7 years old.
What was the dog's name?
Rigo.
Aw.
Yeah, so he was a great dog. I mean, it's funny... For the size of for the work he did and the size, he had to be the most loving dog. Like, he was a house pet that knew how to find drugs and people. Yeah, it was that cool. That's how cool he was.
It's too bad you can't put that on your resume, something like that, huh?
Oh, no, I put K9 handler on a little bit, but
no, I meant the dog.
Oh,
his resume.
Yeah, he was very loving, and well, everybody knew it too because they knew all you had to do was pet him, and then he was your best friend. And mind you, this was if you seen him, like if you were, let's say I was a street cop with him, people would be intimidated because he was actually big for his size.
And what kind of dog was he?
It was a Belgian Mountain Wall.
Ooh.
And those dogs tend to be about 55 to 60 pounds, and he was 70 to 75 pounds, but all muscle.
Big guy.
Yeah, and he let me know it too. He actually pulled my shoulder a little bit one time, and I had to do like physical therapy and stuff, but yeah, because he caught me off guard one time, and that was enough for me to realize never to give him that much slack when it came to the leash.
I can imagine the physical therapist. So you're here, why? You were walking a dog?
They knew, because we had a lot of dog handlers, so they were actually surprised I wasn't there earlier.
Oh.
They're like, oh, dog handler? Okay, that's all we had to know.
So why did you go into law enforcement?
From a young age, because in high school, I went to kind of like a magnet technical school where wherever you wanted your career to be, they let you focus on it. And in this case, they had a criminal justice program. So from 9th grade, I was already learning about criminal justice. So what actually drove me to law enforcement, I mean, in all honesty, although I didn't have a great relationship with my father, well, really none at all, he was actually a street cop. So I don't know if that's somewhere deep inside of me, if that's where it came from, because he never talked to me about it ever. Even to this day, he never talked about being a cop.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because that's where I was going with this. Is that, was it your father's influence? Now, I know you and I had a conversation on the phone, and you're telling me that you were raised primarily by your mom and grandmother. Mm-hmm. So, do you think? I'm no psychiatrist. I've had enough people try and analyze me.
I'm with you. Probably what you're about to say. Well, go finish your statement, but yes, I think the answer is more than likely. Probably. Go ahead.
No, you go.
No. Was he something maybe I wanted to live up to him, or maybe I wanted to prove to him that I could do it? I mean, I don't know, man. Subconsciously, I'm guessing. Because the only thing, I don't think he ever talked to me about it because of the way he left law enforcement. He didn't leave voluntarily. He was actually doing bribes and everything down in Miami, and he got caught. So he never talked to up to this day, he's never talked to me about it ever. Not once. But my mother told me about it, and then I did some homework on him, and yeah, it was like my father's name, Laidler, was caught taking bribes. So that's why he was released. But he never brought it up to me at all about it. And he might have been the only person that was actually a police officer that was in my family. My aunt, she's been in and out of corrections all her life, but working for corrections is what I should say.
Okay, all right.
She's been working in and out of corrections all her life, but even that, I've never, like, outside of where I work now in the correctional system, I never had spent any extended time in a jail doing like any kind of like voluntary work or nothing through them. So I don't know. The actual drive to be in law enforcement, it was just something that I wanted to do from a young age, and I ended up doing it a lot quicker than I expected at 19 when I became a police officer, and it set the tone for my level of maturity, because a lot of things that I learned when I was young growing up in Miami, being raised by two women, being raised in project areas, moving year to year, a lot of that was very helpful with law enforcement, because a lot of people that police officers especially deal with are usually the people that are in I can't think of the politically correct word, but the poor areas. That's usually where most police officers spend their time, because that's usually have the highest crime rates. And as a 20-year-old, that's actually the areas they put me in. And that's, I guess, maybe because I related to the people more. I mean, they never told me why, but I just assumed that. I mean, I've always been a good talker, a good communicator. Not necessarily skilled as I am now, but I've always been able to adapt to people very well. I've been able to empathize, no matter if it's the drug user or the person that's a billionaire. I've always had that balance where I kind of know how to handle all the whole entire room.
So where does that come from, though? Where do you think that innate ability to have such a wonderful life skill of communication, where do you think that came from?
Being humble about my surroundings. Being that the fact that I observed that the way I always looked at it is, if my grandmother can do what she could do with half of her body, so to speak, why can I do even more than that? Like, although she didn't work as like at a job or nothing like that, she was a homemaker raising kids. I mean, she was the one where my sister was raised, I was raised, my cousin, and she was the kind of like the backbone of the family. So I always looked at it like, if she can do it, why can't I kind of have an open mindset? And then my mother's the same way. My mother is probably one of the most loving people. And I know a lot of people say that, but she really is. Like, if she makes $5 an hour, if someone needs something and it takes $4 out of that, she'll give it to them. That's just the kind of person she is. And I think that just because of how humble it made me from the experiences with them, I'm just very comfortable everywhere. And then obviously I've been privileged to be lucky enough to go to schools like Florida State, where you see different groups of people that I necessarily wasn't used to being raised around. And then being a police officer, that really opens you up to everybody.
Because as you stated, you were raised primarily by your mom and grandmother. So what's the backstory with you and your dad? Or, I mean, was it divorce? Was it he just left? What's that?
He was never around. Him and my mother never married at all.
Oh.
Never. So he was the kind of father, and he still is to this day, even to my son. He's the kind of person that will say, I will be there and not show up. Rather than just don't say nothing, he will say, oh yeah, I'll be there, and just won't pick up the phone. So even from an early age, I experienced that with him. And I think that's what drives me so much to even be with my son now. It's like, you know what? I want to be the best father I can be, because I see where people that don't have fathers, where they end up, and they end up living in a federal prison, because a lot of those people don't have fathers, and they end up, the streets call them. They don't have the strong women figures like I had. So it's one of those, you choose a path when you're young. You're like, do I want to be on the right side of the law, or do I want to be on the bad side of the law?
But
the bad side's easier, of course, because it's quick money. It's a lot more realistic, because you see a lot of people doing it. But the good side is where you see the true success, the bigger picture. I know I've been blessed with a few good friends at an early age that I think helped guide me. And one thing, you know what? My mom made a good choice when I was in middle school. I could have went to, I don't know how you guys do it in Colorado, but in Miami, wherever you're zoned out, like wherever you live, that's the school you go to. So if the school's a mile away, that's the school you're supposed to go to. But for my 3 years of middle school, which, and you know this, I'm sure through your studies, is that's very important to kids. Kids are very influential in 6th and 7th and 8th grade.
Right.
She actually put me in a private school for those 3 years. And I think that kept me out of so much trouble, so much of having that influence of, hey, you know what, let's rather than go to school, let's go smoke marijuana. Or, you know what, let's go burglarize a house because we have the time to do it. But I think the fact that I was in that private school at those 3 years, I think that really shapes, like, the path that I took. Because, I mean, even in the same household growing up, my cousin, he's not a bad guy at all, but he's not really, he didn't graduate high school. Like, I think he didn't even get past 9th grade. He's had some arrests, but he's a great father still. But at the same time, he's been fortunate. He's got some breaks on. He's been lucky on not going to prison. But I could have easily been on that path just as easy.
But is it because, or let me rephrase that, why do you think that you didn't follow that kind of path? Because it sounded like you were craving, a male role model. I mean, you talked about you had close friends, but did you feel at times you really wanted to have a male figure in your life to make sure that you stayed on the narrow path? Now, granted, I mean, you had your mom and your grandmother who probably did keep you on a narrow path, but I'm sure there were times where you want to have, male conversation and to be able to ask maybe questions or just have a one-on-one. So why do you think you were able to stay on a positive path instead of, like you were saying, talking about your cousin, how he's been having his troubles?
In elementary school, I don't recall. I don't know what I mean. Outside of watching my mother and my grandmother, they really drove me. But in middle school, I had a really good friend, which he's still my good friend today, and he was a few years older, and I would spend a lot of time with him. And his family they were very educated. Like, everybody had master's degrees. What people had doctor's degrees, and they were workers. So I think that it's kind of how they say you are the company that you're with. That's kind of what happened with him. So while he wasn't necessarily teaching me how to be, because I mean he was just a couple of years older, so it wasn't like he was teaching me the ropes of being a man. He was still being a positive role model. Like, you know what? This is what hard work gets you. This is what rolling up your sleeves every day and going to work and trying hard, educating yourself, pushing yourself. I think that's where it really helped me out, because I was around the right person versus my cousin, where he was around the wrong people. I mean, and the influences were so wrong that it was easy for him to go down the wrong path. But as far as questions, I don't know. I never, maybe because I didn't know that was available to me. I didn't know what I was missing, so to speak. I mean, there's some things that I look back now, being 32, that I'm like, man, I wish I had a male mentor that was actually considered like a mentor, showing me some of the ropes, showing me some of the life decisions I could have made or should have made early. So I know I lacked that, but at the time, it wasn't necessarily brought to me that it had to be important. And I think that comes from a mindset versus necessarily reality, because I've always had a mindset of I can do things on my own. And that's because of my grandmother, really. I mean, I'm like I said earlier, if she can do it, like with half the functions of most people, then I should be able to do with everything. And I never looked at it as needing anybody. And they gave me everything I needed in love. So I never really thought about, well, who's the next man I could talk to, or who's the person that I need to keep on going. So the man question, I don't think I ever thought about him, really. To be honest with you, Tommy, I never really popped into my head until I started getting later in life. I think that's when I became married, of course, going through law enforcement, trying to get male role models. I mean, even that was tough to do because I never learned how to do it. But now I sit here thinking like, man, what could I have been, or how quickly could my progression have been? Maybe what I'm doing now, maybe I could have did it at 25. Or maybe I could have did it at 26 because I had that male role model pushing me, saying, you know what, this is something that you should be doing, or this is something that you can be doing to help you accomplish your goals.
Well, as somebody who is just really starting to come into their faith, and I know you have a strong faith, I'm probably reminded, from talking to my wife, because my wife Ann is this is just popping in my head. I like to, especially on this podcast, Michael, I like to think out loud. And so I'm thinking right now, like my wife is my spiritual advisor. And as I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking, again, as somebody who's just really coming into a faith, is that, God has a plan for everybody. Maybe his plan for you was to make sure that you went through a little bit of trials and tribulations. But the thing is, he did put you in the right spot with talking about your friend whose family had, master degrees. I mean, you went out and you got your master degree. So there is a positive influence right there that you were able to take, even though, as you were just saying, that you felt that you needed to do things on your own because that's what your grandmother did. But the flip side to it is you didn't really do it on your own because you had a friend who, because of his influence, because his family's influence on you, pushed you maybe. And like I said, I am not a psychiatrist, but that's what I'm thinking out loud, is that because of those relationships that you've had have really propelled you to, I mean, you've got your master's degree. I mean, I'm super proud to say you're a Toastmaster brother of another mother. So, I mean, whatever you're doing it well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's funny because, as you said, I started thinking about him. And my buddy that, like I said, Shamari, even to this day, we just talked a couple of days ago. We talk consistently. He was actually one of the groomsmen in my wedding. He was raised by all women too, which is pretty funny. I started thinking about it after we start talking about it. He's never had a male figurehead in his household either. So for him,
what kind of path did he go on?
Oh, he's like a CIO of a major company right now, doing very well. He does very well for himself, and he's even at a young age. His mother drove him to work hard because, once again, she was a single mother as well. So I think that it's kind of like when something John Maxwell talks about, and I believe it's developing the leader within you, is when you have mentors, you have to have people that you could reach, people that have a similar background. For example, it's even at where I'm at right now in my career, my life, me saying I want John Maxwell as my mentor is kind of impossible because he's unreachable. So it's best to find somebody that you can actually get to, someone that's actually maybe just one step ahead of you, so you can figure out how, because it's like kind of like when we have big goals and they say break it down into small goals and it makes it easier and more efficient to get there. I think that's the same thing with having mentors, having whoever, male figures, female figures, whoever you're looking at, you get someone that's in a similar situation as you, that just has a little bit more, or they're on the right path. But in his case, he's on a great path. He couldn't be more of a good role model when it comes to career decisions, as far as like some of my friends go.
I'm going to disagree with you on one little thing, and that is just because, John Maxwell, Dr. John Maxwell, he's got some great books, and, I've talked many a times on this podcast about the influence that Success Magazine has had on me. And now they're doing podcasting, but back in the day they had each magazine had a CD in it, and John Maxwell contributed a lot to those CDs. But I still think that, and here's where I'm disagreeing, is that I still feel that John Maxwell can still be a mentor, even though he's not there with you physically. I think through his programs, his books, his audio, there are ways that he can still be a mentor. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day about, I guess the best way to describe it, I have a huge bro crush on Gary Vaynerchuk. And there are times where I have to stop listening and start doing. And that's because of his influence, because I consider, Gary Vaynerchuk a mentor. I consider Simon Sinek a mentor. Darren Hardy, the former publisher of Success Magazine, I consider them a mentor, even though I believe, and here's what I believe, Michael. I believe that you can meet Dr. John Maxwell. I believe that I can meet Gary Vaynerchuk and Darren Hardy and Simon Sinek. You just have to want it. But my original point is, I still believe that even though there are people out there like Sir Richard Branson, I consider him a mentor. I mean, reading his books. So I that's the only part I'm going to disagree with you, and that is there are mentors all around us. But here's where I really 100% agree with you. You really should go up a notch or two on those mentors, because you want to have mentors that have somewhat been there, done that, and how can they help you? How can they guide you to get you even above them?
And you're right. That's a great clarification on the concept of mentors, because I was asked maybe a couple of days ago, a few weeks ago, about where do I see my business? Where do I see it? And I actually said I see myself as the next John Maxwell, because I do dream big, and I do believe that if one man can do it, another man can, because that's just the way life is. So it's funny when you say it. When you look at mentors in that perspective, you are exactly right. It's definitely you got to have mentors that help you have big dreams just as much. Because there's no reason why I won't. Like you said, there's no reason why I can't sit in the same room as John Maxwell and have a conversation, or Gary Vee, or some of the other high-profile leadership coaches or people who are influencers. There's no reason why I can't, because at the end of the day, they're still people. Oh, exactly. They still eat. They still go to the bathroom. they still do all the normal functions. It's just that where they're at in their life, their business, their what they do on a daily basis is just a little bit higher. It's just at a different scale, but it's all doing the same thing.
Well, I'm a huge fan, I guess another bro crush, of Tim Ferriss. And Tim Ferriss, I can't remember where I heard this. I think it was an interview he did on Success. But he was talking about when he was doing some kind of teaching at Princeton. And he had this, what do you call it? I can't think of it, but he would have a challenge, a simple word, and I can't remember it. He would have this challenge to the students in the class and say, find the most famous person you can, and I'll give you, you had to have proof, and he said, I'd give you a trip anywhere in the world. And the problem was, a lot of people said, I'm going to go find so-and-so, Sir Richard Branson or John Maxwell. And they would get the rejection right away and then stop. Mm. And it's sad, because we put up these walls, we put up these barriers. And, I look at your situation, very similar, to my situation. That was, my parents divorced when I was 5. I was raised by a single mom. Essentially, my grandparents raised me when my mom was working 2 jobs. And, I'll never forget, I think I was in college. My mom said to me, you have no money, you can't afford drugs, so don't do drugs. I'm like, oh, okay. To me, that was mom logic. But I look back and go, I didn't have a strong, really male figure in my life, other than my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, Michael, he was great at telling stories. We'd sit there at the kitchen table, and he would just tell me when he played baseball when he was a little kid. I don't care if I heard the same story 100 times. I just loved sitting there and listening. But I think that we as men have a couple of issues. Number one, I haven't had anything to drink other than seltzer water. Number one, we're still afraid to ask for help. And number two, we're still afraid to not just ask for help, but it's along the same lines of going to another male and saying, I need help. Will you mentor me? Will you take the time and help me get to, where I want to be? Is that your thought process too? You're a coach, so let's put your coaching hat on.
Absolutely. What I usually do for a lot of clients, especially when I first meet them, is that I give free coaching sessions, or a free coaching session, let me clarify. And if I have 10 people, I will more than likely see 8 of them being women versus men. And a lot of that, I think, it comes from that same sense of how I was kind of raised, in a sense of I did all this on my own, at least in my mind. Why do I need somebody now? And I think sometimes as men, that's kind of embedded into us. Like sometimes that showing the emotion that we need, or that we have to have other people help us, sometimes that's hard. And unfortunately, it hurts our growth, because we think we can do it on our own, versus like in a sense of a woman's case, they kind of realize that they need that connection. And I think their growth can be more rapid, especially at times, because of that whole, I don't want to say egotistical, because that's not the right word, but it's more of a kind of like a pride kind of thing, at least from my experiences as being a coach. It's more of men don't want to open up like a woman would. Like men don't want to necessarily tell you, you know what, I'm not performing my goals because I'm sad about this, or I'm sad about a past relationship. Versus a woman will probably within 5 to 10 minutes of a coaching session, I will get them to say, you know what, I had a past relationship that's affecting my performance now. Or they'll give more things that are more intangible that will show why they're struggling, or they're having a hard time with their growth, versus a male where a lot of it will be kind of like, you know what, I can't do it because I just haven't had the opportunity, versus, you know what, there's something else that's inside of me that's affected me.
So what advice would you give to one of your male coaching clients as far as vulnerability, or being okay to ask for help, or is that your son in the background?
Yes, I'm trying to time the muting perfectly, but...
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I told him already that I was going to be doing an awesome podcast, and he was like, oh, okay. And unfortunately, as anybody knows with a 4-year-old boy, that's like, okay, I'm going to talk more now.
4-year-old boy, the listeners to this podcast have heard our dog Duke several times, so it's okay. It's all good. Okay. But what would you say to your male coaching clients as far as, helping them be okay with asking for help? I mean, what one piece of advice can you bring to, and this could speak to the ladies as well, of how can they help their men out?
Well, since we talked about religion before, I'm going to take it from a religious aspect. For those that are believers and they believe there's a higher calling. Even Jesus needed help. Even he had a group of disciples. He couldn't do it by himself. So if he couldn't do it by himself, why do any of us think we can do it by themselves?
Michael?
Sorry about that. My son came running out very excited.
Oh.
So I was trying to avoid him yelling. But
So 12 disciples. So the 12 disciples were Jesus's posse.
Yeah, he had a team. And if you think of the person closest to God, if they needed a team, then why can't we have a team? So when I look at it, I always tell men, open up. When you open up, it makes you vulnerable, but it makes you vulnerable in a good way because that's when you're realistic to people. That's when people actually know that you're being sincere. Because no, everybody's gone through something in this world. Everybody, no matter if you've had the perfect life in your mind or you've had the worst, everybody has a story. And when you tell that story, that's when you see true growth, men or women. And I think that sometimes it's hard to open up because depending on your background, depending on your profession, you're told to hold your emotions in. You're told not to be emotionally open. I mean, it took me so many years to start doing this myself. And that's because I was never told that, hey, you know what? It's all right to be emotional. I mean, when I was a teenager, I never smiled for photos. And now you look at any of my photos, and I'm cheesing. I have the biggest smile you could think of because I realize that emotion is not a bad thing. It's actually what makes us human. It's what separates us from other entities. It's what makes us realistic. So my biggest advice is be open, and you will see growth because you will relate to so many more people, and that's for men and women.
You know, I find it really interesting you say that because, you know, being around women a lot, I would have thought you would have had that, I don't know how to phrase it other than that more emotional side, that you were connected to that side. So I find that shocking that you're saying that.
Yeah, and while I usually tell people, while my mother and my grandmother were very loving, it wasn't very big in our household to say I love you all the time.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy, but that's just the way. That's the neighborhood. That's the environment you kind of lived in. That kind of environment we lived in. Excuse me. It was just one of those. It wasn't like we were saying I love you every day, or I love you every month. It was just one of those things that were known because you're there. But I even had when I first became married, that was one of the issues we had. Is because I didn't know how to say I love you consistently. And it's not because I didn't love my wife, I don't love my son. It's just one of those things that I had to learn. And it's one of those things that had to be taught to me is to say that out loud. Say it to work because a lot of people, they need to hear that. They need to know that you love them, not just show it. Because some people need that verbal reassurance. And they actually talk about that in the I think it's called the love language, the five.
Yep.
They talk about affirmation. And that's important because some people need that. And I think that there's more people that need that than they know.
Well, there's a couple of things there, you know, so two-part question for you, Michael. First is, what was your process as far as having to learn and teach yourself how to say, I love you to your wife and your son? Number two is, if you're struggling, even though, like you're saying, you know, with your mom and grandma, you're already in the house, you already know you love each other, but struggling saying it, and again, I'm playing armchair psychiatrist, and that is, did you love yourself? Is that why there was a little bit of a stumble of not being able to say it?
For me, from as far as I know, I've always loved myself a lot. I've never had, I never liked the public speak to about probably 5 or 6 years ago, where I realized that if I wanted to be a great leader, communication was part of it. But prior to that, it's just the way I learned how to do it is because my wife taught me how to. She would say it every chance she got, so it kind of became ingrained. And then once my son was born, I was like, you know what? He has to know his father loves him. Because I knew growing up, I didn't know where my father stood with it. So I wanted to make sure he knew that. So I had to make sure that he was raised that way.
Was it hard?
With him, it wasn't. I mean, I can tell you, I love him right now, and it rolls off my tongue like it's a part of the English language. It's like that's part of my sentence structure with him. It's like, Michael, I love you. It's so easy with him. But if I maybe 10 years ago, it might have been tough.
And so, what was it? I mean, what was the hurdles like saying it to your wife?
Consistently, because I wanted to make, for some reason, at the time when I was younger, I had to make sure. I don't know. My mind, I felt like if I would have just said it to her without, I don't want to say fully feeling it, but I was worried on how she would respond because I wasn't used to saying it. So I didn't know what kind of response to have from her. So I think it was just a lack of preparation, so to speak, because I mean, I don't want my son to go through that now because he hears it all. I mean, who loves you, Jesus and God, and he'll go through everybody. So I know I'm doing right by him on that, but with my wife and even my mom and my sister now, my wife's easy because that's common, but my mom and my sister, I still have a hard time with them, not because I know I love them to death, but it's just something that we don't use with each other that much.
Have you ever heard it from your dad, and have you ever said it to your dad?
Ooh, not off the top of my head. I can't remember. I don't. I would say no because I don't remember it. And true. I mean, if I can't prove it, then I would say no.
And vice versa.
Correct.
Okay. What's I mean, there's no. I'm guessing here. There's no relationship there.
No true relation. No, there's not. There's not. I mean, it's nothing that we don't dislike each other, but it's nothing that it's not an everyday phone call or how you doing. It's nothing. I mean, health wise, both people are there. I mean, it's just one of those situations we don't find a common ground to talk on. It's never arguments or I hate. It's never been that at all. It's just one of those situations where he's in his world, I'm in mine.
What kind of grandfather is he?
He's not.
Okay.
and that's kind of, I think that's what's kind of, and I do recommend that to any of the fathers, grandfathers. Make sure you do everything you can to put your children in your parents' lives, because him and his grandmother's relationship, both grandmothers, they're amazing. They are blown through the roof. I mean, it's so much that my mother-in-law actually moved to where we live now just so she could spend time with him. And they have such a great relationship. But as far as the father goes with him, it's just I never figured it out. But sometimes one of those things, like, once again, as far as religious goes, if it's in the destiny not to be together in that manner, then I can accept that.
That's too bad. I mean, because I look at, like, my dad, he is such a fantastic grandfather. And I kind of kid, not really, but he told me straight up. And I know, Dad, you're listening. I know you're listening, Dad. I still love you. You know I love you. And I have to tell the story. But he came to me and said, I don't want to be called Grandpa. I don't want to be called, whatever silly little names kids come up with. And it really frustrated me because, no, you're my son's grandfather. You will take on that responsibility. Just like my bonus dad. He's part of the family too. He's grandfather too. But at the time, my former wife's dad, he had passed away when she was a very young age. So, I just felt that, no, Dad, this is going to be your responsibility. You need to step up. And he did. He is just, 2 summers ago, we went to Chicago, and that was the first time he met my 2 bonus daughters. And he took us on, the tour of Chicago, and he treated those 2 girls just like they were his own flesh and blood. And
awesome.
It really, really was. And I remember after the trip, my oldest, Betsy, goes, "Can we go back to Chicago? That was a blast." I'm like, "Sure." Sure, definitely. And I really owe it to my dad for taking the time, for showing his love to two girls he had just met. And again, I give him a lot of credit. And, something earlier I started thinking about is, things, because you learned what not to do from watching your dad. And one of the things I learned from my dad of what to do was, I'll never forget, my dad was a chaperone on like a third or fourth grade trip. And because of that one memory, when my son went to school and the teachers would send out the email saying, hey, we're doing this field trip, we need chaperones, I would make sure I was responding back right away. So what life lesson have you learned from your dad, that good or bad, that's helping you raise Michael?
That if you have a strong support system in any manner, you can succeed. And you have to have that mindset that you want to succeed. There are people out there that are willing to help you, but you do have to put some effort to go get it sometimes. And it's hard to tell the youth that, because obviously their mind's not as mature. But if you are a male and you're looking to have, like you said, maybe bonus children, or you're looking to help out the youth, help kids out. Help show them that there's people that love them. Help show them that there's more out there for them, because that mindset can be very, kind of fickle at that age. So what's really helped me out is just having a mindset of, I'm going to succeed no matter what, because of what I've seen in my history. I don't need just one individual to push me, because I know there's always going to be a team of people, as long as I can get around them, that's going to help show me the right way. I mean, I've always been a very big proponent of learning through other people's mistakes versus making them on my own. I try to avoid to make the same mistake that somebody else has. I definitely try to stay away from that. So I take note of what other people do, what other people say, their life experiences, and I try to make sure I can tailor it in my life to where I don't repeat the same thing that they've gone through. But
I look back on the earlier part of this episode, and you were talking about how you thought that the only way to succeed was you had to do it on your own. Did that mentality change after you and your wife had Michael?
It changed once we started our relationship back in 2006. That's when I realized that having somebody on the journey with me is a lot greater than doing it on my own. I think we met at a young age. I was 20, she was 19, or I was 21, she was 19. We were young, but I realized early that taking this journey of life is a lot better with somebody else. And then as I became older and I started getting to leadership roles, I start being someone that was followed by others, I started to realize that, there is this thing called team for a reason. Nobody gets to a level of greatness without having a team around them. And I think that's what's guided me to start doing what I do now, which is I focus on emerging leaders. I focus on the people that don't have the opportunities all the time, or the people that are overlooked when it comes to developing themselves. Because I know there's such a big gap for when let's call it law enforcement. Let's say when you're a police officer and a sergeant, there's such a big gap in responsibility, because right when you become a sergeant, you're expected to lead people. And 9 times out of 10, you're not trained to lead those people. But if you're a police officer, all you see is your sergeant. You don't really see the chief of the police. You don't see the CEO. So if that sergeant, that first line manager, if they're not good at leadership, you lose so much. And that's what's been driving me, because I don't want to see the same people go through what I've gone through. I don't want people to get frustrated because they're not being trained. They're not being coached. They're not being provided with what a lot of people call soft skills. Because the soft skills are what really makes companies move. Because people are what sells people are what do all the work, not machines or not other items that are automated. It's actual people that make up the company. And if you look at a lot of studies, it actually says that that's if you focus obviously on your customers, then with your people, that's where you see the true success at. That's when you really build up your organization. That's when you're able to be impactful because you're investing in your people, and people are emotional. They respond to that by giving you everything they have and more.
I can't remember who said it, but the quote, and I'm going to probably screw up the quote too, is we manage products, but we lead people. We don't.
Might have been John Maxwell.
Yeah, was it Maxwell?
Yeah, I think he says you manage tasks and you lead people.
Yeah. Because sometimes people say I need to manage my people. No, you need to manage your products.
Payroll.
Yeah, there you go. I forgot the next question. That's what I do. The train just goes off the tracks. Here's kind of where I want to steer this conversation a little. Is so you're a certified John Maxwell facilitator. You have a coaching business. What's your business model like? What's the end, as Dr. Wayne Dyer would say? You think from the end. So what does that look like for you, Michael?
As far as where I want my company to grow to, or where I'm at right now?
Where you want your company to grow to. What are those steps to get you there?
I see at the end of when everything is said and done, if I'm able to be in this field for 34 years to be the next John Maxwell. That's my aspirations, to get to a point in my career where I have people like myself going and coaching. Because the great thing about the things like John Maxwell is he can't reach everybody, but he trains his coaches, he trains the speakers, he gives them everything that he has so they can go do it. And those are the same aspirations I have, because it is so impactful when you can leave your legacy to other people and allow them to help increase others. There's a book by, I can't think of the author's name, but they talk about level 5 leaders. And what a level 5 leader is someone that he just doesn't build an organization up. He builds leaders to take over the organization when he goes. So it's not like the organization needs him to run. It's like, no, I've created this place so people are good even when I leave. And I do a lot of the basics right now, and that's I do 3 basic things in my business. I coach, I train, and I speak. That's my basic motto. I coach, I train, and I speak. I do one-on-one coaching. I facilitate leadership trainings, and I speak to people on how to unlock their potential. I speak to them on the foundations of leadership. I speak to them on how to increase their influence, everything that emerging leaders need out the gate. Because you can go right now on Google or Amazon. If you type in the word leadership, you get 1,000 different entries. But that's not helping nobody. I believe for leaders to be successful, especially young leaders or people that are just getting into leadership roles, you have to start small. Because you're not going to be that CEO of a company if you're your first time leading people. You need a foundation. You need to have a couple of principles, a few values that help guide you. And then as you build yourself into those higher responsibility roles, you add those to your toolbox. But I see so many people just not even having the basics. They're just like, you know what? I want to have 20 leadership qualities, but they never work on the first 3 or 4. So they become overwhelmed and lost because they're trying to do everything. They're trying to hit a home run with the first swing versus maybe hitting a bunt or hitting a single to just kind of get them on base.
I know you and I talked about this on the phone, and this goes back to you said this, and I started laughing, and you're talking about how you want to reach people because I'm going to say we, as in myself, we don't see our great potential. And I was laughing when you said that because I had just was that Monday? That was Monday, and I had I had just turned in my resignation, and then we were talking. I said, "Now I have to go tell my wife," and she understood. She got it, and I'm very blessed that she understood. And so, how does somebody? How do you get the people to see their potential? How do you get people to people have been asking me these past few days, so I heard you quit. Where are you going? And I said, I don't know. And they just look at me. I go, I'm taking a leap of faith because I know my potential. I know, like you were talking about your business. I know where I want to take my business. And it's just, I had to get out of the cubicle farm. I had to get off my butt and say, you know what? I've got to do this. I've got to, jump, and either parachute opens or splat. But that's okay. One or the other is going to happen. So how can you, Michael, tell the audience, the listeners, that how to move them to their potential?
This is going to sound easy, but it's really difficult. But I'm releasing an e-course called The 3 C's for Emerging Leaders. And as I was saying, I narrowed it down to just the 3 C's that I think are essential. And the very first C is character. You cannot unlock your potential. You cannot influence anybody if you don't know what your own values or principles are. You can't go from point A to point B if you don't know who you are. You have to do a true assessment on what you want to do. For example, while I believe the greatest thing next to sliced bread is leadership coaching and training, that's not for the next person. I can't tell my son, you know what, although I have a business now for coaching and training, you're going to do this. Because if that's not who he is inside, if that's not his character, then he will never be great at it. So I tell people you have to find your passion. You have to find obviously the pay is great. Don't get me wrong. The pay is something everybody wants because you have to get paid to continue to market, to show up to places. I mean, nobody flies free, so to speak. But you have to have that burning desire, that intrinsic reward when you do whatever you're doing. And I think that's how you really unlock your potential, is by finding your passion and determining what drives you, what makes you go to bed at night excited, what makes you wake up in the morning even more excited, knowing, you know what, I'm going to go give a presentation on this, or I'm going to go work in the lab on this. Whatever it is, you have to find what actually works for you. And everybody's different, because I can just tell you from the coaching point, I mean, some people talk to me about losing weight, and then some people tell me about their leadership challenges. So it varies, but it depends on what they're looking for and what they have. And that's what comes through the power of coaching, because in the end, it's about the individual's goals. It doesn't matter what I tell them as a coach if they don't truly believe it inside. If they don't believe that they want to become better, then it's hard to work with them. It's impossible. And a lot of times I tell them, you know what? When you're ready for coaching, when you're ready to open up and fulfill your destiny, then let's do coaching together. But you have to want that. You have to figure out who you want to be before you're able to even take that next step into showing people who you want to be.
I have a coworker, and she was asking me, she goes, I don't know what to do. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I really enjoy working here, but I don't know what I want to do. I said, well, what's your passion? She goes, I don't know. How do you help somebody that gives you that answer, Michael, that they don't know what their passion is? They don't know what their, as Simon Sinek would say, they don't know their why. How do you help somebody?
Through coaching and diving deep into their subconscious. There's a book by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, which is called Psycho-Cybernetics. And he talks a lot about self-image in that book and helping people unlock their subconscious, because somewhere in there, some people find out, people like you and I, Tommy, we may find out what we're passionate about just by somebody asking us one question. But there's a lot of people that have a shell up. They have a natural guard up that they're scared of success. I mean, that's one of the best ways to put it. They're fearful of how successful they might be. I was just talking to one of my buddies last night, and he was actually telling me how he sees that he can do more, but he's scared that if he does more, that he's going to be pulled back in and not achieve his goals. So
meaning, what do you mean when you say he's afraid he's going to be pulled back in?
Like, he feels that whatever, for example, he's a great speaker, much better speaker than I am. I can call it how I see it. But rather than him jumping into it and doing speaking, he's scared that if he starts it, some force, God, somebody else, family member, is going to pull him back in saying you're not good enough to do it, or you're going to fail, or that's not his destiny to do that. So rather than just step out on that leap of faith, as we've talked about, he kind of drives himself down. I mean, he's one of those people that can naturally speak, but he's so worried that there's going to be some outside force, whether it's a person, God, whoever, or whatever, that's going to drive him back to not being able to accomplish his goal. One of those self-defeating theories where it's like you're shooting yourself down. And it's funny, I actually tell people I work with at the federal prison, I'm like, hey, because a lot of times they tell me, you know what, I'm not going to get this job, or I can't do this. And I tell them, I said, why think like that? I said, if you don't apply, if you don't try, you tell yourself no. Don't tell yourself no to anything. Let somebody else say no to you. Give it your best effort and see where it goes, because that's the only way you're going to learn. Just like me in my business. I mean, I didn't really have anybody telling me to go do it. I didn't have nobody tell me not to go do it, but I don't know where it's going to go. But I'm passionate about this. It really drives me when I see people, especially emerging leaders, first level management, struggling because they're not trained. And they're so busy doing everything but leading that they start to get burned out. And that's something that burns in me every day when I see it. I'm like, man, there's so much potential there, but you're not unlocking it because you're focused on everything else but yourself. You're not building your self-image. You're not really looking for help. So for people like you're saying, like one of your former coworkers, where she said she doesn't know what to do, I asked, does she want to know what she wants to do? That's the question I would ask her.
Ooh, I'm writing that down.
Sorry, that's where the coaching starts to get deep.
No, that's good. No, that is really good. I haven't, I know I haven't. Maybe somebody listening to this podcast going, I've never thought of it that way. I mean, that's a good way of looking at it too.
Yeah, and I use that a lot in my coaching. I was like, do you want to know? And that's when you hear that pause, that kind of like, do I really want to know how to become better? Do I want to know how to unlock my potential? What am I afraid of? And I ask that all the time. I say, what are you afraid of? What's wrong with being significant? What's wrong with being great?
And I think that's where you've really nailed it, is maybe they're afraid of the success. They're afraid of putting the hard work in order to be successful. And that's maybe that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, I've asked many people that, and that's usually where it comes in. They're like, you know what? I'm afraid that I don't know if I jump into this field, what's going to happen. In a sense of nothing bad, but what if I really am good at it? Then what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I had to use a little bit of stoicism on myself the other day when, I came home and had to tell my wife, put my notice in. And using what the Stoics would say is, you put the worst case scenario in your head, but when it really happens, it's not as bad. And that's exactly what happened. You heard me on the phone Monday. I was like freaking out, and I'm like, and my wife is so supportive, and I'm just like, wow. Okay.
Why is she so supportive? It doesn't make sense.
I know. All I kept thinking about is I'm in so much trouble, but she got it. And that's again, I don't know how many times a day I have to remind myself how blessed I am to be married to her.
Yeah, and that goes a far way with your successes, that you have a partner in crime, so to speak.
Coming from the law enforcement guy, I like that.
I thought that would be kind of ironic. That's why I used it.
I would be very remiss if I didn't mention one more thing about your background, Michael, and that would be muchas gracias para amigo para. That's I don't know if there's even a Spanish word for podcasting.
I don't know either. My Spanish isn't that good, but I definitely understand. I do say de nada for you're welcome for allowing me to be on the podcast with you.
But hold on, you don't you have a degree in Spanish?
Yes, and it was more about Spanish history.
Oh.
And I did learn some functional Spanish in Border Patrol, so I do have conversations, just not. I never want to tell people I'm fluent in it, because when you tell you're fluent, that's when it gets real.
Yeah, my Spanish has usually ¿Dónde está el baño? Frío cerveza. The important stuff. Where's the bathroom? And do you have cold beer?
Yeah. Hey, all the little things you need to get by. But yeah, I mean, my Spanish is good enough to have basic conversations with people, so I know more than the average. But by no means am I a everyday speaker. I would never take that. I would never take my Spanish to that level. But can I converse with people? Absolutely. I mean, I can get the basic information, get the basic understanding of the conversation for that reason.
I think you should do a speech, or let me ask you, have you ever done a speach at Toastmasters in Spanish?
I haven't yet, but that might be a pretty cool challenge.
I think that should be a good...
I might take that one up.
Yeah. So, in Spanish, Michael, final thoughts.
Let's see. Oh, man. I'm trying to think of how I say I'm excited. I know it's estoy something, but I can't think of the actual words for it. Oh man, you done threw me through a loop on that one. I guess I should have been using my Spanish on a more consistent basis, except for every once in a while. I guess me llamo es Michael.
That will work.
Or mi nombre es Michael.
Thank you for listening to Blending the Family. We hope this was time well spent while walking your dog.